Today's show is a little bit heavier on the material side of things. We are going to be discussing mental health and really how to prioritize, manage that to the best of, your ability as an entrepreneur and the experiences that we've had so far. We do want to say before we hop into this, we are not psychiatrists, we are not physicians, and if you are experiencing any bouts of mental health, we do advise that you contact a physician and reach out to the professional help that is out there, and the resources are there. We will link a couple things in the show notes page as well for anybody who is looking for resources. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. I am one of your hosts, Jordan Shelton, and I am sitting here with
Lauren Wesley.
And we both run our own service-based businesses. We've experienced what it's like to work with teams, now working largely with ourselves in decentralized teams, remote teams. It's one of those things that it's a little different when you get into running your own business and trying to prioritize, mental health as an entrepreneur. So I want to start just with this study and go through some of these numbers we can discuss, and then we'll talk through kind of like, what has our individual experience has been like with mental health and running a business. So UC Berkeley put out a study, and they said that 72% of entrepreneurs had some sort of mental health issue. Of the entrepreneurs they studied, they saw 30% had a history of depression, 19% ADHD, 12% substance abuse, and 11% with a reported bipolar disorder. Shocking, but not shocking, if that makes sense. I think, yeah. What's your first inclination when you hear that?
I mean, it makes sense. I think, unfortunately, during the pandemic, with so much isolation, a lot of people who had never really experienced mental health issues, did. And I think a lot of the environmental factors that contributed to that during the pandemic are also the same things that, as we'll talk about, are, if you're an entrepreneur starting your own business, some of those factors might make their way into your world. So whether that's isolation or, people don't quite, I don't know. Yeah, maybe
I think
let's
that's
get
a good
into it
one
a
to
bit
jump
more.
into first, right? Isolation, loneliness. This is something that I don't know. I've talked with like a lot of people who've started companies, and that seems to be a common thread. They're like, I just feel quite alone, where like I can't even talk about this stuff with my partner because they don't get it, or my family members don't get it. And the only time they feel like they can really talk and express themselves from a business perspective and about the challenges that come along with that, are with other entrepreneurs. So that's the first part. I definitely have felt that, right? Have been like, oh, I've got an employee there's some issue happening that is wild that I can't really talk about to anybody, or there's like a company refusing to pay us or something, and I can't really go, and just nobody wants to hear that, right? In my general circle. But other entrepreneurs get it, and they go, "Oh, this is, how I would try to get paid, or this is how I had an employee in the past who did something." So I definitely resonate with those feelings of loneliness. COVID obviously is like a petrol on the fire when it comes to any of that feeling. Has there been anything that you've done or any resources that have helped you navigate, maybe first navigate that feeling, and then two, any outlets that have maybe helped with, alleviating that feeling of loneliness?
Definitely. Yeah, I think, just to kind of continue on the point that you're making, and a major difference between the isolation or, the things that an entrepreneur deals with in contrast to what we saw during the pandemic is during the pandemic, people really rallied to recognize and find solutions and to shed light on mental health because so many people across the board were experiencing something. Whereas entrepreneurship, again, until you really build that community around you of other entrepreneurs, which takes some time, you don't have those opportunities to have those conversations. I think for me, what really helped was getting some sunlight. That sounds kind of, maybe I'm not sure how that comes off to people, but I really do think that getting outside, getting, the blood pumping helps a lot. Just to like exercise in general. I mean, there's so many studies that show the physiological effects of exercise and how it can help alleviate so many of the symptoms of depression or, a lot of mental health issues, I guess.
Yeah, the related issues, right?
And I think there are so many resources available. I think often the inertia, if you are dealing with some sort of mental health issue, it's hard to kind of come out of it, to be able to see outside of it, to find solutions, or to actually like take that next step to find a solution. So for me, once I realized that, okay, my depression is getting to be detrimental to me completing my work. Okay, it took a little bit of time to recognize, okay, I'm in a slump, and for some reason it's really hard to understand what you're experiencing, or I felt it was hard for me to understand what I was experiencing fully, even though I've dealt with it my whole life. And I think it was a combination of things. So at different seasons of my life, I've tried different things. So when I was really young in high school, I first went to therapy. And then from there, I'd always journaled my whole life. So that was really helpful to, start talking about what you're experiencing, talk about your feelings without judgment, and allow yourself to look back on it by the end of when you feel like you've wrapped up your thought, kind of look back and see, what's real? What am I making a mountain of that really isn't? And, you know, begin to gain a sense of clarity. But again, that takes time and it takes, that effort. I do find, aside from journaling and therapy, I've done cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's a really great workbook that I want to include the link of. It'll be in the show notes as well. But that's super helpful. Active exercises that help you reframe your thinking. And, again, kind of going back to the physical aspect and how, getting the blood moving, getting those endorphins pumping, that can really help alleviate the symptoms. A combination of things work really well. I found yoga with Adriene was really good. They have specific ones too where you can find symptom-based yoga, or guided runs with Coach Bennett with the Nike app. Shout out to Coach B. Those are super, super helpful in helping kind of reset your mind and get you back on good footing, pun intended, going for a walk or a run. And I've also found, I purchased an Oculus with, once I started making a little bit more money more consistently, I decided to purchase one of those. And I found that the Supernatural app is incredible. It's like essentially you turn yourself into a fruit ninja, and the aggression that, or maybe aggression is the word, not a good word, but the level of exhaustion that you can get yourself to in a small space, by yourself, without fear of, if you're a type of person where, like me, sometimes I can be self-conscious of how I look to other people when I'm working out. So for me, when I'm in those slumps, things that you can do at home are super helpful. So being able to just like, knock out all of the energy that's built up, and, they're super motivating as well. So those are, I highly recommended ways to help work through your slumps.
And for anyone, we will link to all that because I know if you're sitting and you're like, what's a fruit ninja? What is supernatural? They're apps, and they're apps that are like fitness based apps, on the Oculus, that are really, really good. I think you said something there that really resonated with me. I mean, all of that is very true, right? It's like tales as old as time. Go out, get sunlight, move your body. You're going to feel better. And it's one of those things that we hear it all the time, and it's just true. Like for myself, it's just helped so much getting outside and doing that. But you said something really important when you're talking about journaling that resonated with me. You talked about putting your thoughts down without judgment, and I think this without judgment part has been so hard for myself that it took a while to say, okay, if I am whatever, not having the best day or having the best week or whatever it may be, I can't look back on my day of work and be mad at myself for not having output like other days when I'm fully energized and ready to go. that to me is such a huge thing, is like understanding that I'm not a robot that's just going to have this like, linear output, which we talked a little bit about on the last episode about like linear output versus sprinting. So I recommend checking that out if this is your first time listening to the show. But yeah, like not holding myself to some unbelievable standard with regards to, if I have a bad day, it's okay. And I'm still moving forward, right? I think that is so, so important, especially as you start to build your own business and you're inevitably going to take some punches. Like I feel like entrepreneurship, and this is like, and the mental health thing is really, there's like this Rocky Balboa speech where it's pretty much the whole premise is like get knocked down 7 times, get up 8. But I really think that like that is accepting that you're going to get knocked down and have those bad weeks and not judging yourself for getting for having a rough go or having a rough period or having a rough quarter, right? We hear stories all the time of this success, that success, all these things. Very rarely do people talk about like, oh, I had to lay people off and I'm dealing with the emotional like baggage of thinking I'm a failure because I had to lay somebody off, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
bad at business because that happened or whatever it may be. So I think that like just giving yourself a little bit of like not going so hard on yourself really when it comes
Mhm.
down to it. I think and separating, an internal pressure and the pressure to succeed and the drive from negative self-talk and just beating myself up. I think that has been really important to like distinguish what are those and how do I, approach that.
I think what is going back to the stats of everything, of how many people, how many entrepreneurs, 72% of entrepreneurs having a mental health issue. It's interesting because I feel like at moments, and it's something I've been working on over time, that self-talk, but it's almost like I've reached this new point as in my entrepreneurial journey where my negative self-talk, which once helped as a propeller, as a motivator to, in some twisted way of how my brain, functioned, helped me get to a certain point, but those rules don't apply to this new chapter. The rules, or maybe not rules is not a good word, but the that's not helpful. It's not
Mhm.
useful to beat yourself up, especially once you realize that entrepreneurship business has ebbs and flows, has down periods, like you said. And again, like we talked about last episode, you need to be able to separate your identity and self worth from your business because the two are not the same. Granted, one highly influences the other to a point, but you just have to ride the ride. It's ups, it's downs, things outside of your business happen, family issues. I mean, we've had quite a few things that have popped up in our families, each of us. And I know for me, speaking candidly, I had a few days, at least 3 days, where before, maybe a few years ago, it would have taken me like a week maybe to come out of a slump. And now it was a couple days, maybe 3 days where I was just out of it. I, was just trying to show up. There's some days where you knock things out of the park and everything feels like it's good, but then there's some days where you just have to show up and try your best. And I think that practice of continuing to show up and continuing to try, sit at the computer and just, but also, try. And then if you hit a wall, acknowledge that and step back. And like you even told me earlier, I'm like, I hit a wall earlier when I was just doing some work and I hit a mental wall trying to condense this complex idea into some short form content. And you told me, maybe step away. And it's something that is so helpful as a reminder that you're not a robot and you have to kind of listen to yourself for better or worse,
Yeah,
like
I think like listening to myself, and then I'll say another thing that's at least helped is doing a time audit or an audit on my previous week and saying, okay, what gave me energy and what took away energy from me, and what makes me feel good and what doesn't make me feel good. So I got real with myself. There's like, yeah, I got real, and it's like, oh, if I go down a TikTok rabbit hole, do I feel good about myself when I finally close the app? I've never felt good about that. Okay, delete TikTok from my phone. Take Instagram off my phone. I took all these apps off my phone because we work in social media. I'm going to find a way to get the messages and see the stuff. It's all going to show up one way or another. I wanted to take off some of the algorithmic stuff because I think this is another part about mental health for me is like protecting, I hate saying like protect my energy, but realistically, like there's so much negativity out there and things that can cause myself to react a certain way. It could be some political news, it could be anything that I'm going to try to protect myself from being part of this just like news machine of negativity for as long as I can each day. I've started now putting the phone away and I don't look at it for the first hour to 90 minutes in the morning. That has been unbelievable for there's no email that's gonna put me into a panic or a social media account or anything. I can have my mornings, right? I'm allowed to have my mornings, and work will be there, and the emergency, quote unquote, will be able to be fixed in an hour, or somebody else on my team will be able to address it and handle it. So that has been so important to me, is like looking at what's giving me energy, what's taking it away, where am I letting things creep in, and maybe I'm having an adverse reaction to those. Negative news, maybe it's poor food choices, maybe whatever that may be, not going outside for 2 3 days, like in COVID, we all felt that. So that's been something else that's been really, really helpful, is like, okay, just, yeah, looking at what inputs are coming in and how to
Yes.
control those.
That really resonates with me as well, and we read this amazing book, which we'll link as well, called It Takes What It Takes, and there's this amazing chapter where they really bring to light the act of managing your inputs. Managing, taking an active role in making sure that the things that make it into your brain, consciously, subconsciously, that you are in control of the messages you're receiving, that you're not going to open your phone when you first wake up and see something. Maybe it's political, maybe it's, whatever it is, insert random topic that really fires you up that you're passionate about. You have to make sure that you create those firm boundaries to protect, yes, protect your energy. That's so real. I mean, if I open the phone and I see something that pisses me off, I'm going to be pissed off for a while. It's not like that adrenaline subsides instantaneously. Like, it's, I can't quote a specific stat, but basically, when you are angry, when you have activated that response, that physiological response in your body, it takes time for that response to settle back down to neutral. So if you can take an active role in protecting your energy, protecting your mental space, protecting your thoughts, and trying to be intentional about channeling them in the right direction, channeling your, you know, starting the day off on the right foot, then that's only going to help give you that momentum, especially as an entrepreneur, to show up as the best version of you.
It's so
Yeah.
true. And it's one of giving yourself the best chance to show up as that the version that you want to be, right? The one other thing I did want to touch on, kind of as an issue that undoubtedly I think is entrepreneur and everybody that will feel it, entrepreneur or not, is imposter syndrome. So I'm just gonna, like, if you've never heard of this before, you probably felt it, but imposter syndrome is basically when you feel like you're a fraud or like you're faking it at work. There's actually been, stories of like cardiologists at Johns Hopkins University that are afraid that one day somebody's going to come in and find out they don't know what they're doing. So just to show, like, that people who hold this massive expertise at an extremely high level institution feel this. So I want to just kind of give y'all some techniques that have helped me with imposter syndrome when I feel that boogeyman creeping in to my psyche. So I've definitely felt this. I feel it all the time, where I think, oh, I'm a fraud. Who am I? I don't know what I'm doing. Why do people pay me? Why do they trust me? You know, this is a
Why do people pay me? Yeah.
yeah, like like they
I
could just
felt that.
go get somebody else who's better and whatever. And there's two things I have to remember. So, one, whenever I go on LinkedIn and I look around, or if I have friends or anything, I never once think that those people are imposters. I never think, that they're faking it. I think they're doing a job. I think they have, they show the results. They do the work. And I never have once ever thought anybody else was a fraud. Okay. So then that would lead me to believe that people aren't thinking I'm a fraud either. Right? That's the first part. So that's one of the things that's really helped me is like, well, if I don't think anybody else is a fraud, why would people think I'm a fraud? Two is acknowledging that when you become an expert at something, certain things feel like they're not work. You're able to diagnose and like attack the problem at work like really quickly and almost with a subconscious. The same way that maybe like when you drive somewhere and you forgot how you got there, you don't get imposter syndrome after like I don't know how to drive, right? It's so natural. I think about this with work. There's so many things that we do naturally, or not maybe not naturally, that we've learned and are now just part of our day. We take the podcast, we record it, we upload it, we send it over, we write the headline, we do the thumbnail, and it's all just like boop, 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 boop. We don't think about like, oh, I don't know how to do a podcast. I can't make a thing. Like, no, we do that and it's part of the process. Where I find myself getting imposter syndrome is on the edges. And what I mean by that is why isn't the podcast bigger already? Am I a fraud because only this many hundred people downloaded it and we should have thousands of downloads? Right. So like just rewinding my level setting where I'm at and where I'm going and not beating myself up too much. So kind of coming back to that without judgment. But that's one thing I did want to just kind of address because I think that's something that as you start a company, especially if you don't have, maybe even if you do have, but like, look, we made this stuff for people who like don't have MBAs and 20 years of experience in an industry, but they're like, hey, I know how to do X service and I can provide it, to people and I can do it at a fair price or a great price, whatever. And I'm willing to run a good solid business from there. So that feeling of imposter syndrome is just normal to get.
Yeah, and I think kind of circling back to the fact that people who are listening to this, if you are interested in starting your own business, I think it would be doing you a disservice to not acknowledge that mental health is something you have to actively work on and be mindful of as you grow and start and grow a business, because it was the one thing that I hadn't factored it into my plan. Not that, I mean, I was kind of fast and loose with starting my business, which is a whole other conversation, but I think I hadn't I could not fathom the journey that I would have to take, how I would have to grow as a person to be able to become an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur. And yeah, the mental health piece of it is something that nobody really tells you. They say, "Oh, it's hard," but I think it's kind of nobody says it to you because you probably aren't talking to other entrepreneurs, and if you are talking to people who do have a normal, quote unquote normal job, they don't understand. So their response, when I did talk to a couple friends about it, kind of came out when I went to go have lunch with one of my friends. Long story, I'll make it short. And while we were at lunch, I was probably about 2 months into starting my business. And I think I was just about to land a client, my first client, and or probably not yet. Maybe it was about 4 months until I landed my first client. Anyway, and I was sitting at the table with her in a restaurant, public restaurant, and she's like, "So, how's it going?" I literally started crying at a restaurant in a public place because I was so stressed. I was worried and I was feeling insecure about myself and my abilities and my ability to sell, because when I was working at the company, when I had my stable job before, I never questioned my abilities or my self-worth. I didn't really feel insecure in the same way that you do when the company name is removed from you. You can't hide behind it anymore. You are for myself, I was the product essentially. My brain, me as a person, I am selling me and I'm selling my abilities. I can't hide behind anything. And it was really interesting because I felt, well, any success or failure, which I felt like a failure at the time, it was me. And I hadn't quite realized that I could separate the two. And you know, that was really tough because her response as well to me was, well, why don't you get another job?
Yeah.
There's a couple openings that you could do. And my family, for probably about, I don't know, 15 months into my business journey, even though I had clients, even though I was making money, my family kept sending me job postings for so long, for comedically long, up until probably, yeah, up until the point where they're like, oh, well, I guess you're doing that. So I'll stop. Like you
Yeah.
must be doing fine if you've been living on your own, without a quote unquote job, a normal job for this long. Like, wow, you must actually have figured it out.
Yeah, it's interesting there, right? Like two things I've always found when family did that for me was understanding that okay, my family's coming from a place of caring when they did that, not that they're doubting me. So it's like reframing that. And then kind of the overall point from that, the I take from your story there, which I really resonate, and I think anyone who's starting a business is yeah, you can't put mental health on the back burner. Also, no one's coming to save you as an entrepreneur. So you're putting all of the when you're in a company with 100 people working around you, you're all sharing 1/100th of the stress. When you start your own business, you're taking all 100% of that and it's now on your shoulders. So it's a big thing to take on and it's something that can't be just pushed to the side and then oh I'll just handle that later or I'll get fit after or I'll get my diet right after or I will start going to therapy later or I will do mindfulness when the business settles down. That I did that and it just didn't work for me. So that was one of those things that I'm like, okay, that I would give that advice to anyone to say I wish, when I got started that I just prioritized my mental health a little bit more. We will put
Yeah.
resources and everything we mentioned will be in the show notes. So links to the books we talked about, also links to some resources. I also want to say, before we wrap this up, as always, this podcast. This is our stories. It's hopefully educational and inspirational. But with this subject matter in particular, if you need help, please seek out a physician, a licensed physician, and they will be able to help you address or take on any of those issues surrounding mental health. Thank you again for listening. It would mean the world to us if you left a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Yeah, until next time, I'm your host, Jordan Shelton.
And I'm Lauren Wesley.
And we will catch you on the next episode of Think Forward. All right, y'all. Take care.